I've used a lot of meal services, but Hungry Root truly stands out because it's built around the way real families live and eat. They don't just send meal kits. They personalize your grocery cart and meal plan based on your preferences and dietary goals. All I had to do was take a short quiz, and right away, their smart cart technology started building a cart that fit how we eat. Now, each week feels easier, like someone else is doing the thinking for me. I've been focused on cleaner eating lately, and I love that Hungry Root keeps out over 200 additives, including things like high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners. Their meats are hormone and antibiotic free, and the produce options include organic and non GMO picks. They also stock brands I already trust, like Oatly, Vital Farms, and Harmless Harvest. One of our favorite meals has been the teriyaki salmon with green beans, light, flavorful, and done in 12 minutes flat. Plus, I've noticed we waste less food, spend less time shopping, and even save money by skipping those impulse grocery buys. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg and use code Dr. Meg. That's hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg, code Dr. Meg, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/Dr. Meg, code Dr. Meg. Did you know that exposing children to various types of literature, like stories, informational texts, and poems, can actually boost their language skills and vocabulary? So if you're a parent and you're looking for a great new series to enjoy as a family, today's episode is made for you.
I just believe that you shouldn't write down to children that if it's a good story, it's a good story, no matter who's going to read it. And so for me, and what that means, I think, is that you take very seriously the stewardship of the imagination of the kid that you're writing for, while at the same time, you don't pretend like the world isn't actually broken. You know, I think kids already know the world is broken. I think as a kid, I remember I could sniff it out pretty quickly if a book was talking down to me or wasn't taking seriously. I needed something that said, yeah, the darkness is real, and also something stronger than it, you know?
Welcome to Parenting Great Kids. Here's your host, Dr. Meg Meeker.
My guest is Andrew Peterson. He's an award-winning singer and songwriter who is also the creative genius behind the Wing Feather Saga, which is a fantastic 4-book fantasy adventure series now available in video. The Wing Feather Saga isn't just for kids. There's stories that you can enjoy as an entire family. Andrew, thanks so much for joining me on Parenting Great Kids today.
It's so good to be with you.
I've been looking forward to our interviews so much because I have to be honest, I love your music and I listen to your music all the time. And I didn't realize until recently that you were an author and you had these fabulous books out. So before we talk about the books, you know, as an author, I can always tell when a book is bubbling in me. Take us back to before the time you did the Wing Feather Saga. How did you know it was something God wanted you to do?
I wanted to be an author before I wanted to be a musician. So back when I was a kid, I was very into comic books, movies. I was always reading fantasy novels. And it like back, 8th, 9th grade, I did what a lot of kids do, which is you think I'm going to write a book now. And then, you get 20 pages in and you realize how hard it is. And then you're like, actually, maybe I'll just go skateboard.
Or 5. Yeah.
Yeah. And so music just kind of was the horse that I rode out of town. I ended up learning to play guitar, joined a band, ended up moving to Nashville after I was married and had a music career going and put out a few records, but never let go of that dream of knowing what it was like to write a big story, which was kind of what got me into music. It was like, I loved music. So I thought, how do you, it wasn't enough to just listen to a song. I wanted to know how to play the song. So I played guitar and then once I learned how to play some Skinner songs and some Tom Petty and some rock and roll, I was like, wait a minute, somebody wrote these songs, somebody made them. And then I kind of wanted to know what's it like to get under the hood and figure out how to make a song. So the same thing led me to the books. I've loved reading as long as I can remember. And I just was like, I got to know how this works. What's it like to get inside a story? And so I carried that dream for many years until my kids were old enough to read the Narnia books to them. And we read a lot as a family. And I think that was the thing, to read a story that I loved when I was a kid and to experience that going on the journey with them night after night was profoundly moving to me. And I was like, I got to do it. I've got to know. And so they were my first audience. So I think that for me, it was having an audience to write to first. It was like, art at its best is when it's an act of love, I think. And so to think, I'm not just writing a story just because I want to self-express. I wanted to write a story because I wanted to wake something up in my kids. And so they were the ones who were the real impetus behind this thing.
I love it. I totally know what you mean, because as our kids were growing up, every night before bed, when my husband actually would read the Narnia Chronicles, and he would start when they're like in first grade. I said, these kids are too young. They weren't. And to this day, they're all grown. It still is a big part of their childhood. And it's something that they always have with their dad. They'll refer to something from Narnia. And even though, they have a husband there, he may not know what they're talking about. It's a real glue. So there's something magical about reading with your kids. It's that shared experience, but it's so much deeper than watching a movie together, because you pull on your imagination. It takes longer. So you did it for your kids. Was there any part of you that thought, gee whiz, my kids are growing up. A lot of the books out there are horrible. I want to write something great for them. Or did this just come out of your sort of creative juices? I mean, is this stories that you just made up in your mind, or?
I know that yes to some of those questions. Like my oldest son in particular was a voracious reader. And, you have these high ideals of, I'm going to preview every book that my child reads. And after a while, they leave you in the dust. And there were a few times when he was reading something, I'd pick it up and I'd be like, ooh, I don't know if I love this. And, we'd have to talk about it. We tried not to be like, we were careful, but we mainly tried to keep the conversation open, about what you're reading. Let's talk about that. How does that line up with what reality is? And so, I think really at its heart, I just wanted to feel like I was 12 years old again. And I kind of loved.
You wanted to live in a story.
I did. And there's something so wonderful about being a grown up, having to pay taxes and bills and all this, and then putting on your writing hat and spending 2 hours trying to imagine an adventure scene, or trying to build a mythology, or to draw a map. It was just a wonderful experience. And I've never, really, that 12-year-old version of me is alive and kicking, and so I really enjoyed getting to have like a common language with my kids while I was telling the story.
Yeah. So would you ask them, would they help you write the narrative, or was this all you and then you'd sort of test it out on them? Did you test it out on them? Okay.
Yeah, I would write several chapters. I'd write, 100 pages of it. And I'd be like, okay, I'm ready to share the next chunk of the story with you, after I'd kind of, ironed it out a little bit. And it was just great, because kids are better readers than grownups are. I think, I experienced this the first time I went to a school, an elementary school, to do a book visit as a first time author. I was so intimidated. I was so nervous to go talk to in the library, all the kids are sitting on the floor and you're going to read a chapter. And when I finished reading my chapter, the hands shot up immediately. And they all had these piercing questions about, who would win between a toothy cow and a fang of dang, or whatever. The kids have this ability to enter the story much quicker than grownups do. And so they were the perfect test audience. I knew that if I had them, that I was onto something, and so, yeah, keep it. And really when it came to telling the story, I kept thinking, how do I tell the story in a way that makes them want to know what happens next?
Right. Well, it was funny when I first, was going through through your books. What we're talking about is Andrew Peterson's sagas. Is it 5 books?
It's 4 books with a few extra kind of ancillary books. Yeah.
Okay. And it's the Wing Feather Saga. And the first book is On the Edge of Dark Sea of Darkness. And so if you look at the covers, they tend to look sort of sinister and a little bit scary. And I never did well with scary books. But what I found, because I'm a pediatrician in my office, is kids will often come in and they're reading stuff. They love this kind of stuff. Even the Narnia Chronicles are scary. And there's something about dealing with good and evil and allowing them to see that juxtaposition and almost, living through fantasy is really very good in the old classics, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and so forth. People say, well, it's too violent or whatever. But, kids need to be in there struggling with good versus evil and dark versus light. And so I could immediately see the appeal to kids. Or were the Narnia Chronicles, did they inspire you or did they have anything to do with you with this whole series?
Yeah, they did, in that I loved them as a boy and as a grown up. I think Lord of the Rings is in the same category, in a different way. Maybe even love that even more. But I think mainly because they gave me a context as a Christian to enter into a big sweeping fantasy story. Musically speaking, I grew up listening to all kinds of music and playing music, and then when I heard Rich Mullins' music for the first time, he was a Christian who was a singer-songwriter who died like 26 years ago. He was the one who I heard and I was like, oh, it sounds like the music that I already like, only he's writing about things in a way he's using a language that I'm familiar with. Does that make sense? And so I think Narnia and Lord of the Rings were the same way. It was like, oh, I see where these guys are coming from. They're tapping into something really deep and bright and good. And that inspired me.
Well, one of the cool things about them, and I think that you have the ability to do with fiction and stories, is you're writing on different levels all at the same time. It's like the Narnia Chronicles. You'll read it on one level and then you go back and read it again and it's deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's what's so genius, I think, about creative works like this. You're writing it to not just 10-year-olds and 12-year-olds, but you're writing it to adults as well. And I think I don't think many people can accomplish that. I read a lot, and I read a lot of historical fiction. Adult writers who write to adults write adult stuff, and kids writers write to kids stuff. But to be able to write to both audiences and have a wonderful message for each is really hard. Was that a struggle for you, or did you not even realize you were doing it when you were writing the books? I
just believe that you shouldn't write down to children, that if it's a good story, it's a good story, no matter who's going to read it. And I think C.S. Lewis said something about how, now I'm blanking on the quote. Something about how, the best stories for children aren't just stories for children. That's the idea. And so for me, and what that means, I think, is that you take very seriously the stewardship of the imagination of the kid that you're writing for, while at the same time, you don't pretend like the world isn't actually broken. I think kids already know the world is broken. They already know their parents fight. They watch the news, or they walk through the room when the news is on. I think as a kid, I remember I could sniff it out pretty quickly if a book was talking down to me or wasn't taking seriously. I needed something that said, yeah, the darkness is real, and also something stronger than it, And I think the other important thing is that in a lot of Victorian novels, which I love, like George MacDonald, I love George MacDonald. He went deep, but there's a kind of like quote unquote safe story for children that can be good, like really wholesome. The evil is obviously evil. The good is obviously good. I think there's a place for that for sure. But at the same time, I wanted to write a story where the evil was out there and also in here. right? In our heart. Because it's not just that the world is broken, it's that we are also broken.
Yeah. And how does a broken person figure out the mess?
Yeah, exactly. And
It's
they
hard.
need hope. They need to know that there is some kind of hope for healing internally as well as externally.
I think that a lot of parents at times are very nervous about their kids reading about darkness and reading about pain and the things of like, one of the things in the past 15 years I've seen is that a lot of parents are very much against the old fairy tales, Hansel and Gretel, because they say, no, this is too scary for kids, or wherever you see a wicked stepmother. And Bruno Bettelheim, you say, no, fantasy is incredibly important for kids because they need to be able to identify with the anger, for instance, that they may have towards a stepmother. It doesn't mean that she's a witch, and it doesn't mean that, but kids are able to deal with that. I tell parents that don't be afraid that, the fairy tales are good. Your kids, they realize they're probably not going to get shut in an oven and cooked for dinner. But anyway, so let's talk about your books. You have 4 in the series. Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I think the last one is my favorite book. Back when 2020 happened and we were all in lockdown because of COVID, I read the books on Facebook Live. I don't know if you heard about that, but I decided that every night I was just going to read 30 minutes of the books and read all 4 books over the course of the year. And so many families tuned in. I think there were 99,000 individual streams the first night. And my wife and I started crying. We just were like, oh, there's all these people that are stuck inside like us who are looking for a story to read. And so when I made it to book 4, the books were, I don't know, it's almost 20 years ago now that I started writing these stories. And there were several moments in book 1 that I would cringe a little. I'd be like, oh yeah, I would write that differently now. But by the time I got to book 4, I kind of forgot that I was reading myself. I felt like I was reading a real book, with a capital B. So I think the only way to learn to write is to write. And by the time I got to book 4, it's not like I was some great writer, but I could tell that I'd grown up a little bit as a writer.
You're a storyteller. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think book 4 is probably my favorite one.
Your publisher must have just cringed because that's a big no-no, is to give away the whole book for free. But how fun. And so when you wrote the first one, did you imagine it was going to be a series?
I did, yeah.
I mean, was that your intent?
It was,
okay.
Yeah. I had a big story in mind. And it took 10 years to write the whole thing. And that's part of why book 4 was so satisfying, is because certain moments in the ending were things that I had in my mind from the very beginning. And I couldn't wait to get there. I couldn't wait to reveal these secrets that I'd been sitting on for, almost a decade.
Isn't that funny? I always joke that authors write books for ourselves. I don't write fiction. I write nonfiction. But it's basically, if I have a problem to solve with one of my kids, write a book about it, because you'll figure out the answer. And then hopefully somebody, so if you want a great story and you wanted your kids to have a great story, that's just kind of what you do. You basically write it for your kids. Was this fun? Was it hard? Did you ever get to a point that you said, I'm halfway through a book and I just can't finish this?
Oh yeah. I think any creative work, there's a correlation between painting and poetry and novel writing and nonfiction writing. The creative act is a difficult one. And that's part of the satisfaction and the joy of it. And so the nice thing was, having been a songwriter and had put out a few records at that point and was continuing to put out albums while I was writing these books, there's a pattern that the creative process tends to follow. And I'm sure you've experienced this, where you have this initiating idea and then you dig into the work and you run into speed bumps and you have difficulties, and then the pit of despair. And then there's where you find the thing and you finish it. And what you end up with is a little different it's never as good as what you imagined in the beginning, but you're kind of like, well, there it is. And so that happens on a small scale with writing a song. It happens on a bigger scale with writing an album. The 10 songs for an album, the creative process of going into the studio and feeling completely uninspired, or feeling like the song isn't working. It worked yesterday, but today it feels like a dud. What do you do? And all these little lessons about pushing through and perseverance and collaboration, prayer, like really trying to serve the work and humbly chase down this creative thing. I had already experienced that in so many ways as a songwriter. And then when I sat down to write these books, when I ran into those walls, I was like, oh, I know what this is. This is just like when I write songs. You just got to keep fighting for it, or you got to let it sit for a day and come back to it, or whatever. There's, really perseverance is the thing. Like and I've written a couple of nonfiction books, and one of them is about the creative process and adorning the dark. And I talk about how, being a writer doesn't mean writing. Being a writer means finishing. Like there is something that happens when you cross the finish line and finish that first draft of the book. It's the first time that you ever get to see the whole story from a bird's eye view. You actually know now this is actually what the ending wants to be, which is different from what you thought it was going to be. And then you get the fun part. To me, the fun part is the editing process and taking the story. Now that I see it, I can tease out the themes that showed up. I can, get rid of the parts that don't need to be there and augment the parts that needed to be augmented. And so, yes, fun once you get past the first draft. The first draft to me is just a grueling, really, that's where all the self-doubt lives, all the like, what am I doing? Is anybody going to like this book? But once you get to the ending, you can go back and tweak it and add the lipstick sort of, you can kind of go, I'm going to refine it. And the refining process to me is a great joy.
I have to take a quick break, but before I go, I want to invite you to join me on Instagram and YouTube. You can find the account as Dr. Meg Meeker or simply enter the handle at Dr. Meg Meeker. And while you're there, click on the link in the bio for immediate access to valuable resources for your parenting journey. We'll be right back. I've had so many parents say, Dr. Meg, my child is bright, but they're struggling in school and I don't know what to do. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And that's why I'm excited to share K-12 powered schools with you. K-12 offers tuition-free, accredited online public education for grades K through 12. These programs let kids learn at their own pace with built-in flexibility that supports different learning styles and family needs. And unlike homeschooling, K-12 provides certified teachers who guide your child's education online. The lessons are engaging, the technology is hands-on, and your child gets real opportunities to connect with clubs, extracurriculars, and even in-person events. As a mom, a grandmother, and a pediatrician, I know how powerful it is when education meets your child's needs instead of the other way around. So if you're looking for something different, something better, go to k12.com/Dr. Meg and find a tuition-free K-12 powered school near you. That's k12.com/DRMEG, all caps. Some days, parenting feels like chasing moments that never quite land. You ask a question, they shrug. You try again, they look at their screen. And you wonder, why is this so hard? That's why I love FamGabs. It's a 70-card deck created by a child therapist who spent 16 years working directly with families, helping parents and kids break through the awkward one-word answers and really connect. The questions are open-ended, thoughtfully chosen, and designed to get your child talking and keep the conversation going. There are even bonus cards just for parents to help you build your confidence in your connection toolbox. If you've ever wished for a better way to understand your child or just to have more meaningful conversations as a family, FamGabs is such a gift. Search FamGabs on Amazon and use promo code DrMegPod during checkout to get 10% off your order. That's FamGabs on Amazon. Use promo code DrMegPod and get 10% off your order.
So can you just sort of give us an overarching theme about what they are? Because I really want people to read these books. I love hearing about what makes Andrew Peterson tick and how you get going here. But starting from the beginning into the end, so the overarching theme and the overarching narrative, because I want to ask you a few things about that after you sort of outline it for us.
Well, I'll say that it's so funny. When we were working on the TV show, we had to go, the showrunner, producer, Chris Wall is this wonderful human being who's been driving the whole thing. We spent literally years working on how do we distill this big 4-book story down? How do we translate it into a visual art form? Because you have to tell the story differently. It's an animated show. And so we've spent so much time trying to boil down what are the themes? What is the thing about the Wing Feather Saga that makes it the Wing Feather Saga? And I've realized that I'm kind of the wrong person to ask. I'm standing too close to the painting to really be able to see it for what it is in some ways. And so I will say that two things that it is at its heart, there are these 3 kids. There's Jan or Igby, the main character, but there's these 3 siblings who think that their lives are kind of not terribly interesting. They live in a little town on the edge of the dark sea of darkness. Ha ha. And they, and then one day through a series of events, they discover that their lives are anything but ordinary and that they are at the heart of a great mystery that will possibly save their world. And so, in this book, I really wanted to make it so that, the family worked best when they were all together, when they were on the same team. There are so many books that I read as a kid. It's a lot easier to write a story if the main character is orphaned in some way. If it really is,
It's instant tragedy.
Yeah. And it works is that there's a good reason why so many stories have, Harry Potter or, even the Pevensey kids in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they were sent out of London because of the war. And so there's something that happens when the kid now doesn't have a parent to run to fix everything. They've got to figure this stuff out on their own. And I think that's important. But I was like, can I write a story where the mother and the grandfather are on the same team as the kids, where they're all on this journey together. They've each got their part to play in this huge story. So that's one thing that I think is an important part of the Wing Feather Saga. But I will also say, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but
Go ahead and say it.
I'm a pastor's kid, so I'm a little bit allergic to lessons in stories. Like there's a part of me that when I'm reading a book, if I start to get the feeling that the author's trying to teach me something, my brain just kind of shuts off. And I'm like, oh man, I was enjoying the story and now I'm in a Sunday school class. Does that make sense?
Yes,
and
exactly.
So I think
totally. Yeah.
When it comes to kids, especially, but I would argue anybody, let the story do its work. Let the story, it is a mystery how stories work on us. I can't tell you how many times I've written a song and had somebody tell me that what they got out of the song was completely different than what I intended. And that is a wonderful thing about art, is that it can go out there and surprise even the person who made it. So, in the making of the TV show, this happened literally yesterday. I was reviewing one of the scripts for season 3 and I wrote a note, no teachable moments, because it was one of those moments in the story where the mom was like, oh, let me now impart some wisdom on you, child, in a way that I would never talk to my own kids in that way. It smacked of Sunday school lesson time. And not to say that lessons are bad. Themes are good. Life lessons are important, but I think you have to let it be a story first and let the story do its thing. So there's this great, there's an author named Sally Lloyd-Jones, who's a good friend, wonderful writer. And she wrote this book called the Jesus Storybook Bible. And it's just this marvelous, you should read it if you haven't seen it. It's great. And she was telling the story about how she was in a Sunday school class and she was like the guest speaker in the Sunday school class. And the teacher asked her to read one of her. So she reads from her book and then reaches the end, but the Sunday school teacher was not back from wherever she went. And all the kids were kind of staring at her and she didn't know what to do. So she said, so tell me, children, she said, to her own horror, she heard herself asked, what does the story mean? And she said, whereas before the kids were literally inching toward her on the floor to get closer to the story itself because they were caught up in the wonder of it. And then she said, "What does it mean?" And she said, "It was as if I had placed a physical burden on their shoulders." And the kids all slumped over and they were like, "Oh," and suddenly it had become a lesson and she'd popped the bubble of the wonder of the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think
Absolutely.
it's so important as a writer to make room for the story to be what it wants to be. And that doesn't mean you don't have a hope for what the people are going to get from it, but you also have to hold that loosely and let it do its work.
You're absolutely right. Because if you're reading through a book and then at the end, the person even asks you questions or, what does this mean? It's kind of like a test, but it's almost like they're assuming you really didn't know what was happening all along. It's like, wait a minute, but you're absolutely right. And that's what, like the Narnia Chronicles, that's all I can think of comparing with your work, is that it is all there. And sometimes you see it and sometimes you don't. But if you see it, that's not up to you. That's God's deal. And so to pull that out, but what happens is the story just penetrates into you. And I think it just needs to percolate in there. And I think this series will do that. What are your ultimate hopes for this series? Like when you die and you've got this beautiful series of books, you're young, but what are you hoping it will do to people who read it? Is there transformation? Do you just want to tell them a story?
Following on the heels of what I was saying earlier, the caveat to all of that about letting the story do its work is that you as the writer do have these high hopes, these dreams that the story will do something. Because I remember vividly lying in bed at the end of a great story and feeling this flutter in my stomach. And I was like, as a boy, a little better able to believe that there was a God, or that there was this light that was stronger than the darkness, that my story was aimed somewhere good, right? That there was a good ending. And that's the Christian story, obviously. And so I think, I don't want to spoil anything about the ending, but I get letters from kids all the time that say they have questions about the ending of the story, and the end the story ends with almost like a signpost pointing to something good coming. But I don't tell them exactly what that good thing is that is coming, and they can't stand it.
Was that hard for you? Did you want to tell them, or were you okay
no.
leaving them hanging?
I loved the idea of leaving it hanging because it means that the story's still kicking around in them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Oh, totally.
It's kind of this is so interesting. I remember reading years ago about the death of Sherlock Holmes, like when Arthur Conan Doyle finally, wrote the death of Sherlock Holmes. It kind of killed all of the previous Sherlock Holmes stories. Like the sales dropped because there's this idea that we had, like, we want to know that Sherlock Holmes is still out there solving mysteries.
Right. Right.
There's this weird kind of, it kind of keeps it. So at the end of this book, I wanted to leave an arrow pointing to somewhere so that when the kid lies down, if they're agitated or they're frustrated that it didn't end, the ending wasn't delivered on a silver platter, it means that the story's still in there kicking around. There's something about hope that as a Christian, we say the Nicene Creed every week in church, and it ends with, we look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. That's the story that we are all living in, is that we don't know exactly how our personal ending is going to be. So all we can do is look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. And so I wanted the story to echo that feeling of there's a signpost pointing to something good, and that's going to keep the story alive and kicking inside you.
And you feel confident in the way you wrote that ending, because I haven't read the ending, that it was clear enough to them. You have the Nicene Creed and you go, I know my hope is there. I know that's real. I don't know how I'm going to get there. But the kids who are reading it have that same sense that good will come and the arrow will get me there. There's a void between now and then.
Yeah.
So you don't leave them without hope. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I think I would argue that I leave them with more hope.
Good. Good.
Like if I told them the full ending, there would be no hope. Hope is this expectation of a thing that we can't quite see. And so I'm leaving them literally with the hope that there will be some good ending. And so, it's okay with me if the kids, it's not all kids, but if a kid is frustrated that I didn't deliver the exact I didn't give them as much information as they wanted. But most of the time, the parents will say, I get it. Thank you for ending the story that way. And I think when the kid grows up and they read the story to their kids, hopefully, maybe I'll get another letter where they say, thanks for ending it.
Well, you're absolutely right. You don't want to close. You don't want to close it in a nice, package and then put a bow on it. It's got to keep them thinking. There's got to be that constant stimulation there going, because that's how the best books end. They don't write the ending for you. They just kind of leave it open. What's next?
Oh man, good question. We're working, like I said, we're finishing, we're deep in season 2 of the TV show right now, which has just been, the whole thing has been amazing. Like to get to see the story translated in the way that I envisioned it.
Are you happy with it?
So happy. Yeah. So, the fact that most of the time the author doesn't get to be one of the executive producers. So I get to be in the room. I get to, I have veto power, which I don't usually need because the team is so amazing. And so, season 2, and then we're beginning work on season 3 already. That's fun. I still write songs, and I hope to get back into the studio and record them these days. But in the meantime, I've been doing music for 25 years or something, and I just really like playing old songs. So I don't have this like burning need to write a bunch of new songs right now. So I love going on the road and sharing those songs with people. And, we do a Christmas tour every year and an Easter tour every year. And I'm trying to, I like to draw and paint. So I'm working on learning how to paint watercolors right now.
Your brain is just popping out all over. You're a true blue. Yeah. Creative genius.
I love
yeah.
that stuff. I don't know that I'm a genius, but I do like to create stuff. And then I'm involved with the Rabbit Room, which is this.
Yes. I wanted to talk about that. We only have a couple minutes, but thank you. The Rabbit Room. What is it, and what do people need to know about it?
Yeah, so it was I founded it maybe 17 years ago. The mission statement is that we cultivate and curate stories, art, and music to nourish Christ-centered communities for the life of the world. Which is to say, I really believe that there are like some of the best stories and songs and films and novels are being written by people all over the place right now. But the kind of like our goal is to try to like nourish people who are doing that work, but also draw attention to stuff that it gets missed by the kind of industrial complex of Christian music or whatever. Just because so much goodness is out there, and we just want to draw attention to that goodness because we believe that art nourishes community, and that community so then nourishes art, and that's what the world is hungry for. And so it's this wonderful organization that we have. There's part of the ministry is this gathering house here in Nashville where we put on concerts and gather people as often as we can. We have a conference that we do where my brother is the editor of the Rabbit Room Press, so we publish books. And it's just this whole wonderful organism that's putting out work in the world.
So do you have mostly artists in it, or do you have just lay people? Who is part of the Rabbit Room?
Well, one of the things that we like to say, like for our conference, is that it's not a conference for artists, it's a conference for everyone. Because the people who come are people who either make art in one way or another, whether it's stories or paintings or poems or whatever, but also people who just enjoy stories and poems and music or whatever, which happens to be everybody. And so I think it's just a feast where we celebrate the way God speaks through his creation, which includes these humans that also subcreate in Tolkien's language. We make things in the manner in which we're made is the way he put it. And also through creation itself, we draw attention to the way that all these things are preaching the gospel all the time. And I love that. It's the kind of stuff that, like, when I was a kid in the 80s, growing up in a small Southern town, I wish that, I don't blame anybody for this, but culturally there was nobody going, hey, do you know that you can be a Christian and write fantasy novels? Do you know that you can be a Christian and write songs that aren't worship songs?
And you weren't going to get slapped on the hand.
Yeah.
We have to end. I just have two questions. What do you want kids and parents who are reading these stories and listening to your music, what do you want them to know about God?
I want them to know that he loves them more than they can possibly imagine. My oldest son and his wife just had their first baby, and Jamie and I are experiencing the great joy of being grandparents. And she's actually at the house right now. My wife is watches Phoebe a couple days a week. And there are times when, if you're a grandparent, this, where the baby is like squirming around on the floor, and all of the family is just sitting around watching the baby, like it's the most interesting TV show. And I remember just looking at Phoebe and thinking, she has no idea how loved she is. All of these people are sitting around gazing at her with wonder and affection and delight. And she's going about her day, pooping herself, spitting up, the whole thing, and has no idea just the vast ocean of love that is out there for her. And I think that's the kind of my own journey is I grew up thinking that God was mad at me all the time. And to realize that in Christ, he looks at me with that delight and that wonder, that he enjoys this little boy that has grown up into a man that he made, is a life-changing notion. And that's really what I want people to know. And I think that ultimately is what the Wing Feather Saga is.
So how can people find out about your books? How can people follow you? Are you reading on Facebook Live anymore? Are you singing on Facebook Live? And how can they learn about you and everything that you do?
Thank you. So Andrew-Peterson.com is probably the best place to go, because that's where you can find all of it. You can go to the Rabbit Room from there. You can find the TV show from there. It's at angel.com. And it's free. Anybody can watch it for free. And then also, the Wing Feather Saga, tour dates, all that kind of stuff is probably best found there.
Well, it's so inspiring for me to see how God is using you in such a remarkable way. So thank you for your obedience. Thank you for your hard work and for plowing through those bumps as you're writing anything, because it's hard. It's really grueling. So thank you, Andrew, for joining me today. This has just been really delightful. That's all for today, friends. Before we go, let's sum up our conversation with Andrew Peterson in 3 actionable steps for you parents. 1, fuel your child's imagination through diverse literature, stories, poems, and informational texts. The Winged Feather Saga is a great start. Encourage imaginative exploration to boost language skills. 2, create a shared imaginative experience with your kids. Andrew Peterson's journey from music to authorship highlights the power of a common language. Read together, explore stories that resonate and strengthen your connection. And 3, recognize the universality of impactful stories, transcending age constraints. Refrain from underestimating children's intelligence and emotional awareness. Trust your children to grasp profound concepts and promote rich, meaningful storytelling that challenges and captivates them. For a wealth of additional parenting resources, visit us at drmegmeeker.com. Dive into articles, podcasts, and more to empower your parenting journey. And until we meet again, stay encouraged on this incredible adventure of raising remarkable children. And remember, great kids are raised, not born.